always so daunting when she says that. Recording in progress. Okay, maybe just one more minute. Alrighty.
All right, so hello everybody, welcome to the workshop. Before we get started, I just like to acknowledge that although this is a virtual session and we're calling in across from Turtle Island and maybe beyond, I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on our relationship with this land. So BICYN's work currently takes place in a place colonially known as Canada called Turtle Island. And just on a personal note, I'm currently living in Tiohtià:ke or Montreal, and I'm from Treaty 7 territory. Calgary, Mohkinstsis. And we're really grateful to be able to gather on this land and learn together today and talk about food security. But while gratitude is an important first step, I also wanted to recognize the importance of being in treaty relationships and just take a second to acknowledge the importance of the original spirit and intent of treaty relationships to uphold Indigenous laws and Indigenous ways of life. And to think about that, and when we think about our responsibility towards our children and towards the future generations of people sharing this land. And when we think and talk about food systems and basic income, we are carrying with us different values of collective aid and mutual support that we try and think about in our organizing efforts. And that's in line with a lot of thinking around decolonization. And we know that food security is really complex. We know that Indigenous people are more likely to experience poverty and therefore more likely to be food insecure. And part of the reason why that is because of the Canadian state's failure to enact social policies in defiance of treaty obligations. And all of this is really complex, and I would never pretend to try and understand the nuances or complexities of this reality, but just to say that BICYN, us as a team, we're really committed to decolonization in our advocacy efforts, and growing and learning and commitment to learning is something that we really want to prioritize in our work. So if we could just take a second to think about our relationship with the land and how it sustains us and how it makes it possible for us to gather today. We'll just have a little moment of reflection and then we'll continue on with the presentation. So thank you, everybody. With that in mind, Shanae and I are both really glad you're all here and are really excited to be here ourselves and are really grateful to the Loaded Ladle for partnering with us and for helping make this happen. I'm just going to introduce myself. My name's Ellen, and I'm a fourth-year law student at McGill University. I got involved in basic income activism because of my disillusionment with the law's ability to provide economic justice for people and ensure that people have access to socioeconomic rights. I'm also really passionate about disability justice and climate justice. And for me, I think basic income is essential in helping make sure that people are equipped to survive future climate crisis related impacts. Shanae, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah. So my name is Shania. I use she, her pronouns. I'm joining you from Mohkinstsis, Calgary, Treaty 7 territory, and I'm Cree from Cowessess First Nations, Treaty 4 territory. I'm currently completing my master's in social justice and human rights online through Arizona State University. I also work full-time as a case manager at a local high school, and I'm a member of the Global Shapers Calgary Hub. I was inspired to get involved in basic income activism through my previous work with children's services and my current work in high schools. I'm passionate about giving youth and families the power and agency to build and participate in more healthy and vibrant communities.
I also just wanted to give a shout out to our co-founders, are in the audience right now, Chloe and Kendall. So we're really excited for them to be here. And if at any point, when we're asking questions, they might jump in just to share their own personal knowledge and experience, of which they have lots of knowledge. So welcome to Nourishing Fairy Futures. Our plan for this evening is first, we're just going to introduce BICYN and who we are, what we do as an organization. Secondly, we're going to provide a quick overview of basic income in general, and then take some time to answer some questions about that. Then we're going to get into the meat and bones of food insecurity and how basic income can help address food insecurity, as well as its relationship with broader food systems. And then at the end of the presentation or the workshop, we're going to take some next steps to talk about opportunities for advocacy and then ongoing developments across the country and how to get involved with us. In the spirit of accessibility, when we have slides to present, I'm just going to give a description of the content on the screen for those who might not be able to see it. But instead of describing the content for every slide, I'm just going to give a quick general description of the whole presentation now. All of our slides have a deep purple light gray background with light colored or black text. Many of the slides have decorative graphics. Most of them have young people wearing orange, teal, pink, or purple. And most of the text, if not all the text in our slides, are actually going to be covered in our speaking material. Closed captions are also provided. And then just as a reminder for anyone who might not have been here at the very beginning, we are going to be recording the presentation. So if that makes you uncomfortable, just make sure that your cameras are turned off or you're contributing how you want to because it's being recorded. And then for questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll try and keep them in mind or answer them right away as we go along. But then we also have big chunks of time dedicated to answering questions throughout the workshop. So we'll definitely get to them at that point.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. So first of all, we're just going to tell you a little bit about our group, the Basic Income Canada Youth Network. So we were established in 2020, and we're a group of engaged young people all under the age of 35 in Canada who are passionate about basic income. Our mission is to mobilize young people to advocate for and celebrate the benefits of a basic income. We organize our work through three main pillars, I guess you would call them: community building, education, and activism. And our vision is that we want everyone in Canada to have enough income to meet their needs, participate meaningfully in their communities, and live with dignity. We also want young people to have an active and valued role in the basic income movement, as well as in shaping public policy more generally. And this was born out of our co-founders, again, who Ellen mentioned are here today, Kendall and Chloe. They were actively involved in the basic income movement, but found that time again, the youth voice was being left out of policies and conversations. So a group dedicated solely to young people and the youth voice was necessary. Thus, Basic Income Youth Network was born. So as I mentioned, our work take place in three main ways. So community building involves things like developing cross-sector partnerships, connecting youth with the broader movement. Education would be sharing information about basic income and the youth case by developing resources or giving presentations and workshops like this one. And activism would be campaigning for a basic income in Canada by connecting those with the power to affect political change.
So in explaining basic income, we just need to keep in mind that most of the time when we're talking about basic income, we're not usually on the same page about what it is we're thinking about or talking about. So we've provided a definition just up front. The Basic Income Canada Network defines basic income as an unconditional cash transfer from government to individuals to enable everyone to meet their basic needs, participate in society, and live with dignity, regardless of work status. And some of the key defining characteristics of that is first that a basic income is cash-based compared to non-cash programs like food stamps or different housing initiatives. The second is that a basic income is universally accessible, and basic income should be income tested and available to all who fall beneath a certain threshold, including youth. And then the last is that a basic income is unconditional, which means it should be provided unconditionally, regardless of where someone lives in Canada, their work status, whether or not they meet behavioral conditions. And it also means that basic income should be given to people who have been historically and systematically excluded from income support programs because of things like incarceration or institutionalization. So sometimes when we think about unconditional programs, we can compare this to programs like the Canada Child Benefit or the Guaranteed Income Supplement, which sometimes we like to call basic income-like programs because they're also cash-based and unconditional. And these can be compared to a program like CERB, which was temporary and intended to be universal, but it was not unconditional because it had really specific requirements around participating in the labor market and then having job loss related to COVID. So CERB is a great example of something not being unconditional. And then there's a lot of confusing terminology around basic income and the different models that people have proposed around basic income because it can come in various shapes and sizes. But there's really two common policy models. The first is a universal basic income or UBI, and that became really popular during the formal US presidential elections when Andrew Yang was going on about UBI. It's really popular in the US context. And then the second would be a basic income guarantee. And both of these models are universal in their eligibility and whether or not people are eligible. So they set an unconditional income floor for all Canadians should they meet it, but they differ in how the payments are made and are taxed back. So a universal basic income describes a payment that's made to a broad sector of society, including rich or poor people, all citizens, adults or residents, and it provides the same benefit amount to everyone regardless of their income. Whereas a basic income guarantee establishes an income floor that eliminates the risk of people falling into poverty. And while it's universally available, it's income tested, which means that it's only delivered to people who need it regardless of their work status. So if your income is very low, you would get the greatest amount. And then as your income grows, the benefit would gradually reduce. And then those who have sufficient income from other sources wouldn't get a payment. And then the last term, a guaranteed livable income, is used to emphasize the importance of a benefit being sufficient, not just to survive, but also for people to live with dignity and be able to participate meaningfully in their community. So across Canada, a guaranteed livable income is what most groups are advocating, but sometimes that language gets confused and conflated with basic income guarantee.
So now that we have the basics of basic income, we're just wanting to hear from some of you guys. What would a basic income mean for your school or your community, wherever you're joining us from? I want to try the whiteboard feature because I think it's super cool. But if people are just like, this is absolutely not the vibe, then that is totally okay. So I'm just going to open up the whiteboard feature for us here. And hopefully this is accessible for people. So Ellen, can we see this? Okay, great. So you should be able to see like a bar that has like text or draw, and you can just draw on the whiteboard or type on the whiteboard. You can put even different colors and you can just write out what are some of the features of a basic income that would be helpful for you or for your community. The nice part about this feature too is that I'm hiding the names of everybody who writes on it. So for those of you with social anxiety like me, you don't have to feel embarrassed about the answers that you're putting up. And if this is inaccessible for people, then you're welcome to just put it in the chat or unmute yourself and participate.
And just so people know, the way that you can like put text or draw is just by going to view options at the top and then clicking annotate, and then you'll be able to see text or draw. Just seeing it, I had to like figure that out a few times. So
Thanks, Ellen. It's hard when it's like from my point of view and it's just there for me. So we can see that people have written more opportunity for students to engage in social justice and activism, improved mental health, not having to worry about making ends meet, being able to focus on school. Um, allowing students to participate in studying, volunteering, and other activities without being worried about the basic needs. Basic income allowed space in life for rest and play, would give people more flexibility to study and learn, more security, sense of community. Yeah, so these are all really great options. And then in the chat, we see ability to eat well, get medication, have time to focus on building community, education, and yourself the way that you wish to. That's awesome. Thank you, everyone. So we'll see how technology works with me here to get back. All right. Okay, are people able to see the presentation again? Okay, good.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I think what a lot of us covered is really important and actually has been shown in evidence. So there have actually been two main basic income pilots in our country, the Manitoba Basic Income Pilot and the Ontario Basic Income Pilot, that show some of the benefits that we all listed. So first of all, a lot of people might worry that if we give everybody a basic income, that people will not work anymore. And that's actually found not to be the case. People want to work, they want to be participating in and contributing to their communities. We might see a modest reduction in hours, but we do see increases in entrepreneurship. We see decreases in crime rates, particularly with poverty-related crimes such as theft. Better educational attainment, a really common theme from the whiteboard, increases in school enrollment, attendance, and high school graduation rates. This is actually something that's so key to the work that I do. In schools, I actually work with the students that have to drop out to work full time because they have to contribute to their homes and the basic needs in their homes. So I work with them to find other sources of funding and income that are able to keep them in school. And so a basic income would be like really key for those students. People might worry about what people are spending this basic income on. Maybe it's frivolous, but it's actually found not to be the case. People will spend it on things like clothes, food, and bills. There's better health outcomes, so improved mental health, something that we saw on the whiteboard, decline in doctor visits, hospitalizations, self-reported stress, higher level of trust towards both individuals and institutions. I think we saw that on the whiteboard too. And overall, this just all leads to better community level impacts. So more community involvement, better social connections. And again, on the whiteboard, we saw some people point out that people could get involved in activism or be more involved in their communities. So this is all super important. And what's actually particularly important to us in our network, and the reason we exist as a youth network, is because for young people in Canada, basic income policy is a glimmer of hope in a social and political context marked by uncertainty, volatility, and fear for our futures. So really, basic income would provide stability for young people to plan for and invest in their futures with less fear and uncertainty. And we all know that like housing and tuition and all of these things are way more expensive and out of reach than they were in previous generations. So a basic income could improve youth access to housing and provide a much needed foothold in the housing and rental markets that feel increasingly inaccessible, especially we know lately the housing and rental markets have just been insane. It can also help with pursuing education. There's a collective Canadian student debt of 28 billion as of 2018. So it would make it easier for people to enter and remain in post-secondary education and then leave education without of debt. And then young people are disproportionately concentrated in precarious work. So basic income responds to the reality that having a job doesn't necessarily mean being able to put food on the table, and could help challenge exploitative working conditions. You don't have to remain in a job just because you see no other option. You can actually make your working environment better for yourself without the fear of then not being able to go home and put food on your plate. Others have pointed to other arguments like a basic income could be life-saving for youth aging out of care who are cut off from other supports. It could relieve financial pressure from those expected to care from parents or guardians, or provide extra support for 2S LGBTQIAP+ youth who leave non-affirming or unsafe living situations.
So we just wanted to take a second to see if people had questions about basic income in general, and also just us as a group, like BICYN, Basic Income Canada Youth Network. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or yeah, sure, Min, go for it.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing all of those amazing information. I do have a question about basic income being unconditional. So for example, if will that also consider, for example, if it's an international student, or if it's someone who's holding a work visa, will also be able to receive the basic income if they are just like a temporary residence?
Ellen, do you want to speak to this? Because I know this is something you consistently bring up as like a worry.
Yeah, I mean, I can try and speak to this. So that's something that comes up a lot when people are discussing a basic income program, whether or not it's like at the federal level or at the provincial level, and like concerns that people who are non-citizens will be excluded, because that's the reality for provincial assistance, like social assistance programs right now, and then other benefits like the Canada Child Benefit or the Guaranteed Income Supplement. Those are things that people who aren't citizens also don't have access to. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the presentation, but it just goes to show that basic income is not like a perfect solution. It's not a silver bullet by any means. And also some work would have to be done in other policy areas like immigration and refugee law to make sure that basic income would be provided unconditionally to people who aren't citizens who are also living here as well.
Thank you.
Chloe?
I'm so sorry. That was a great answer, Ellen, and yes to everything you said. I would just say, Min, there are a lot of people who are excluded from current income support programs, absolutely temporary residents, also people who are living in institutions, including prisons and jails, as well as people living in institutions like for people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. Like there are lots of holes in terms of who's actually eligible to receive income support in Canada right now. Sadly for us, we're not the ones who are in a place to actually design what a national basic income program would look like, but our advocacy always takes the most inclusive approach in terms of how many people can we bring in who are left behind by current systems. So yeah, it's a great point and something that we think about and talk about a lot. So sorry, you guys are doing great. Sorry for interrupting.
No, we appreciate you popping in, Chloe. Chloe's our resident expert, and so is Kendall. So happy to hear from them. All right. We did slot in. What the heck? I'm just gonna exit out of here because that was overwhelming. I'm gonna go here. Sorry, guys. I was gonna say we did slot in a break here if people are feeling they need like a couple of minutes to just like stretch their legs or get some food or whatever. So maybe we'll just give you guys a couple of minutes and then it works out with my like tech little moment. So yeah, we'll just do a few minute break here.
Yeah, so 5:36, we'll start again.
Is my break slide up? Okay.
Yeah.
Very cute.
Also, just don't mind me if I have to turn off my camera to blow my nose. I don't know what is happening. I just can't get rid of this cold.
Okay. Hi, everyone. We're going to keep going. Thanks
Yeah.
for waiting. So now we're going to get into food insecurity and basic income, and why we think basic income is a transformative solution when it comes to addressing food insecurity and just being one piece in the puzzle. And before Shania kind of explained some of the key stuff about food insecurity, we thought it would be fun to do a little trivia game on Kahoot. And there is a prize. So the prize is actually a book called The Case for Basic Income, and it's by two people, Jamie Swift and Elaine Power. And we both read it. It's really accessible. It provides like a useful history of basic income across the country and the basic income pilot programs in Manitoba and Ontario. So yeah, the winner of the Kahoot game will get this. For those of you who haven't played on Kahoot before, just go to www.kahoot.it and then put in the PIN 422712. And we'll wait for everybody to join and then we'll kick it off.
I just joined so I could test the pen. I'm not going to play. Don't worry, guys, it's not rigged. And then I know that somebody had said that they're kind of just listening. So I think that should be just about everyone then. So let's see if we can get this started. Okay. All right, food insecurity trivia. Let's see where your knowledge is at. So how many Canadians in the 10 provinces are affected by food insecurity? Your options are 5.8 million, 4.3 million, 7.1 million. And then this other option that's getting covered by the Zoom toolbar. Oh my gosh. 3.2 million. Correct answer, 5.8 million. And then it keeps score, so no pressure, guys. So severe food insecurity was the lowest in what province in 2021? British Columbia, Quebec, Alberta, or New Brunswick? A lot of people pretty confident with Quebec. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that might be the case later. Chloe can't win the book, so don't worry.
It's really competitive. I'm not gonna win though.
So in 2020, how many people in Nunavut lived in food insecurity? 12.6%, 35%, 18.3%, or 23.3%. There's also music to this. I don't know if people can hear it on like, but I muted it because I think it's so shit. Wow. A lot of people thought higher than it actually was the case, but that's understandable. And in a lot of the surveys that we're going to talk about in the next part of our presentation, the territories and the Northern Territories, they're really left out of a lot of these surveys. We don't have a lot of good data on them. So true or false, is food insecurity associated with food skills, such as knowing how to cook or knowing what to cook or recipes? It is not. It is not a cause of food insecurity. However, Ellen and I will talk about why we think it definitely can be included in food insecurity or food insecurity issues. How many people accessing the food bank are employed? 1 in 9, 1 in 4, 1 in 7, or 1 in 12? So 1 in 7 are employed who access the food bank. I'm actually surprised to see that people thought it was more. And we'll talk about employment and food insecurity in a little bit as well. In 2021, how many households who reported their main income as social assistance were food insecure? 55.7%, 63.1%, 70%, or 54.3%. (63.1%). Social assistance is also something we're going to touch on. Okay, final question. Get your finger tappings ready. Last chance to win the prize. What percentage of post-secondary students are food insecure? 37%, 33%, 44%, or 40%? It is 40%. Nobody got it right. Oh man, the numbers are all really close together, so it's fair. Okay, let's see who wins. Third place is Jamie. Second place, Sue. First place, it's Chloe, but really first place is Sue. So Sue, you can get in touch with us after the presentation. We'll let you know or let us know how we can send you the book. I think you have our email already, but we'll put it in the chat at the end of the presentation. Thank you guys for participating in our little trivia. I'm just going to bring this presentation back for us. This is really testing my technology skills today, I gotta say. A stressful time. Okay, how does that look, Ellen?
You're back on track.
Excellent. So, first of all, I just want to say that food insecurities' effects on health are unmistakable. It incurs steep costs to physical, mental, and social health, and consequently the healthcare system. Being severely food insecure shortens people's lives by 9 years and costs the healthcare system twice as much as being food insecure, or food secure, sorry. And we like to boast ourselves as this wonderful country that is Canada, and we love Canada. But based on the latest data from Statistics Canada Canadian Income Survey, 15.9% of households in the 10 provinces were food insecure in 2021. This amounted to 5.8 million Canadians, as we saw in our trivia, and this includes 1.4 million children under the age of 18 that live in food insecure households. In fact, households with children are more likely to be food insecure than those without. And as we can see, the survey divides food insecurity into 3 categories, encompassing varying degrees of worrying about food, to compromising quality of food, to limiting food intake, all the way to missing meals. And of course,
yeah, I don't want to cut you off. It's just the slides aren't transitioning. It's still stuck on the trivia thing.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Is it on the graph?
Yeah, we're on food insecurity in Canada.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, okay, so now as you can see, this graph encompassing varying levels of food insecurity. So it ranges from marginally food insecure to severely insecure. And we just want to point out that, of course, this graph oversimplifies the breakdown of food insecurity. As Ellen mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we know that Canada's long and ongoing history of colonialism and systemic racism leads to different groups experiencing food insecurity at higher rates. It also depends on where you live in the country. So as we learned in the trivia, Quebec, you are the least likely to be food secure, where Alberta has the highest percentage of food insecure households. And this alludes to the fact that governments might play an important role in protecting their citizens from food insecurity through policies like minimum wage, welfare, taxation, and a basic income. Hint, hint. And the picture for post-secondary students is no different. 40% of post-secondary students live in food insecurity. 7.1% of people who access the food bank are post-secondary students as well. And we often hear about this like trope. I'm sure we all know it, of like the starving student who lives off of ramen noodles and craft dinner. And I feel like as a society, we've convinced ourselves that this is just like an integral part of the university experience. But really, it's not okay that we have to choose between education and food. Hence this little guy who's like trying to eat his textbooks. You spend hundreds of dollars on textbooks depending on what degree you're in, and that's not food. So let's talk about what some of the common safeguards that exist against food insecurity. So the first one is employment. A lot of people often misunderstand that employment equals income security and therefore food security. Income security and therefore food security. But the majority of households who are food insecure report their main source of income as wages, salaries, or self-employment. Simply having a job is not enough to ensure having basic needs. And as we learned in the trivia, 1 in 7 who access the food bank are employed, but their income is insufficient. And I think what we saw from the majority of the answers there is that people actually view the situation as worse than it is, which I think speaks to how things are right now in our society. And I take this next point with a grain of salt. The study showing that the $1 hourly raise would result in a 5% reduction in food insecurity. I thought it was super cool, but the study was done in 2017, so I don't think the numbers would translate quite the same. Because most of us are aware that groceries are super expensive right now. I was actually just reading that the cost of groceries has risen 11% over the past year, and consumer cost of food reached a 41-year high in October 2022. But that study does show that there does exist marginal increases that we can make in our policy and when it comes to wage and welfare that could help workers be more food secure. So if people who are working are struggling, imagine how people who are not able to work are doing. So almost 2/3 of houses relying on social assistance are food insecure, and over 1/3 of houses relying on employment insurance are food insecure. Again, same study might not be quite as relevant today, but it did show that a $1,000 annual increase in social welfare would result in a 5% reduction in food insecurity. So again, we're just talking a very marginal increase in the amount of money that we can give to people to help them be more food secure. So as Ellen talked about at the beginning, it was not, not necessarily accessible to everybody, and overall not really enough to support people's basic needs. 42% of houses relying on CERB were food insecure. However, it's important to note like what it did do. So this is from Food Banks Canada. It says, while some regions such as larger urban areas still saw visits to food banks increase throughout this period, this initiative alone may have prevented many more people from across the country from turning to food banks for help. So while it wasn't the most perfect thing, it definitely likely safeguarded a lot of people from falling into severe food insecurity. And finally, we have our food banks. So food banks are wonderful, but they are not a consistent source of food and do not provide users with the choice in quantity, quality, and variety of food given. They are also a band-aid solution to the problem. They're not actually addressing the reasons why people access food banks in the first place. I actually have some personal experience through my work with food banks in terms of how it is with being a consistent source of food and giving people choice. So right now I do a lot of referrals to food banks, and it's about 10 days until people can get their food bank hampers. So that's a long time to be going without food if you're already like, oh my gosh, I don't have food, I don't have money to get food. So sometimes I will go to the grocery store just to get some basics for these students or for their families. And I'm dropping like $100 on like bread, milk, cereal, like just some of the basics to get them through like the next 10 days. It's expensive. And then in terms of choice in quantity, quality, and variety of food given, I did drop off a hamper for a 17-year-old who's living on her own. And they gave her like a big bag of beets. And like, it was so cool and wonderful that people are getting fresh produce from the food bank, but at the same time, the 17-year-old who's like already struggling to live on their own for the first time is just like, what am I going to do with this giant bag of beets? And so it's really important for people to also be able to participate in the choice of the food that they're being given. And funny enough, Food Banks Canada, their first recommendation for addressing food insecurity is actually the implementation of an income floor. So even Food Banks Canada recognizes that a basic income would be a solution to food insecurity. Therefore, food insecurity and income are inextricably linked. Food insecurity just is the inadequate or insecure access to food due to financial constraints. Household food insecurity is a marker of material deprivation, tightly linked to other indicators of social and economic disadvantage. Households with lower incomes are more likely to be food insecure. So if these two things are linked, then the solution to food insecurity will need to include income-based solutions. Okay, Ellen, make me stop.
So the link between income and food insecurity, just thinking about food insecurity as being defined as like a material deprivation, a lack of income, it's really important to think about that when we think about how income-based programs and income-based solutions can be a meaningful solution in addressing food insecurity. And we can see that it is from evidence from targeted basic income programs, and basic income-like programs, kind of how I was explaining before, that have shown success in reducing food insecurity. And we can see it primarily from the Guaranteed Income Supplement, the Canada Child Benefit, and then results from the Ontario Basic Income Pilot Project. So I'm just going to explain a little bit about each of the three. So the guaranteed income supplement acts as a form of basic income right now that reduces rates of food insecurity among older persons. And the probability of food insecurity drops by half for unattached adults on income assistance once they reach the age of 65, which is the age that you have to be to qualify for old age security in the guaranteed income supplement. So that's really significant that food insecurity drops by half once they have access to the guaranteed income supplement. The second example is the Canada Child Benefit. It provides monthly payments to households with children up to the age of 17, and it's also been shown to reduce food insecurity. And between 2015 and 2018, households with children experienced a drop in the likelihood of experiencing severe food insecurity from 3.6 to 2.5. So that's not as big of a drop. And keep in mind that it's severe food insecurity and not just moderate food insecurity. That's something that Shanae was explaining before, just the differences between moderate and severe. In the case of the Canada Child Benefit, they're talking about severe food insecurity. But the biggest example of the evidence of what a basic income program can mean for food insecurity is the Ontario Basic Income Pilot Project, which began in 2017, but then was unfortunately prematurely canceled just after 10 months because of a change in government. However, participants from the pilot project reported a drastic reduction in food insecurity and positive dietary outcomes as a result of having received the benefit. 65% reported overall better health, 77% reported much less frequent stress, 77% reported eating better quality food, and then 73% reported a decrease in food bank usage. And we wanted to speak a little bit more about the Ontario Basic Income Pilot Project because of how much people had to say and how it was addressing food insecurity in their lives, but also because our team in the past did a project highlighting some of the impacts of the pilot project, and it was called #BasicIncomeBotMe, and it was a project between our team, between researchers who studied the Ontario Basic Income Pilot and then the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty. And the project used social media to highlight how participants from the project, drawing from over 68 interviews, talked about how spending their basic income payments, what spending their basic income payments meant to them, and just how powerful a basic income pilot project could be in affecting their food security. So I wanted to read out a few of the quotes from Basic Income Bought Me. I've been able to spend more on healthy food and eating more often, so I'm no longer missing a meal. I'm always getting all my meals, getting my nutrition, and being able to afford the right nutritional stuff, not just buying garbage, but actually buying wholesome meals. Being able to have a full fridge, full cupboard. It was the first time in my life I saw 3 cupboards filled in my fridge and my freezer. So those are 2 quotes, but then something else that Shanae and I were talking a lot about when we were preparing for this workshop and just thinking about food insecurity and basic income was just how much food insecurity extends beyond just being able to have access to food itself, but can also mean having access to proper appliances, to being able to cook food and prepare food, and then other things. So somebody else said, we also bought some new cookware. Our cookware was really old and rusty. I've been using the same baking sheet for 20 years, so it was nice to be able to replace some of those things. Our home completely changed. We were related. It was nice to be home. And then a few other people talked about being able to take friends out for lunch or cook for friends, which also shows just how powerful a basic income can be for food insecurity in a social sense, and how much food also just in general is such an important part of our social lives and our overall well-being. So those are a few examples from the Basic Income Bought Me project. But something that we wanted to highlight was why a basic income, like the Ontario Basic Income Pilot Project, instead of more targeted benefits like the Guaranteed Income Supplement or the Canada Child Benefit. And one of the big advantages of a basic income, as opposed to a targeted program like the ones I was mentioning, is the inclusiveness of the strategy. And we know that food insecurity affects a diversity of households, including people who have children, people who don't have children, people who work, people who don't work, people who are reliant on income assistance. And so having the adequacy of one's income be the sole criterion to receiving a basic income means that it would optimize the potential reach and the potential ability of an intervention like basic income to be able to reduce food insecurity. Something else we also wanted to touch on was we've already talked about what a basic income can mean for students in general, but we specifically wanted to talk about what it could mean for food insecure students. And a lot of this data comes from a recent study at Queen's, where researchers interviewed food insecure students. Just bear with me, I live by a church, so if you hear loud ringing bells, I hear them every hour. I really apologize if it distracts anybody listening to the recording. It's definitely distracting me, but I'm going to do my best. So yeah, most of this data comes from the study from Queen's, and they were interviewing different students on how food insecurity was impacting their studies, and to the degree to which it impacted them. But some of the things they were saying and talking about the benefits of a basic income was they predicted that for domestic students, a basic income would basically meet all the issues that people had with basic needs, including food, shelter, clothing, and rent. And we also touched on earlier, Menu raised the really important point of how this would not, right now, at a given stage, a basic income program would not cover international students. And that's a really huge gap. And I'm really glad you brought that up. But beyond that, a basic income would mean that students are relying less on tuition, like the reduced cost of tuition or provincial assistance for student loans to be able to pay for food, and they could instead use that money towards education, which means that students would be able to graduate with less debt. And something that was close to my heart was that they also talked about how it could help students enter into programs that are gatekeepy and are known for having barriers, like lots of barriers. 5 of the 27 students they interviewed for this study were law students. And I mean, law programs usually have double or triple the tuition costs of regular graduate school programs. So it means that lots of marginalized students are prevented from entering those programs in the first place. So basic income program could help with that, could help improve academic performance because food insecurity is shown to reduce academic performance, and then could also help improve mental health, which someone brought up on the whiteboard at the beginning of the presentation. And those are just a few of the things. This is not something that has really been studied very closely and definitely merits a lot closer attention. But we wanted to make sure we talked about it in the context of students. So we're about to move on to another section on food systems, and we thought we would just put in another break just so people can grab water, go to the bathroom, do your thing, grab a snack if you need. So we'll be back at, I don't know, 6.
Is that too long of a break? I think that's good for people. I know that I could use.
Cool.
Jamie free breakfast program, and honestly it helps so much. Yeah, and that's exactly helping with academic performance. You cannot take a test on an empty stomach for sure. Yeah, so maybe we'll regroup at 10 minutes past and get on to our last section of the workshop. All right, so I think we can get started. Ellen, this is all you.
Yeah, so thanks everybody for just like all your contributions so far. Like Shanae and I have really been like blown away with just your engagement in the chat and stuff. So just wanted to say that we really appreciate that. The last section of the workshop is on basic income food systems and just thinking beyond. And we really wanted to talk about food insecurity in the context of a broader discussion about food systems. But we recognize there's a lot that we could talk about here. So specifically, we wanted to talk about two things. The first is the relationship between basic income and Indigenous food sovereignty. And then the second is the relationship between basic income and food system workers. And we just want to keep in mind that both of these topics could be a whole workshop or presentation on their own, and neither of us are experts in those specific topics. But we thought it would be important to touch on and think about when we're discussing the relationship between basic income and food insecurity. So the first, Indigenous food sovereignty. We wanted to talk about this because the final report of the Commission on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls called for the development of a basic income guarantee for all persons living in Canada, including Indigenous peoples, and then also the development and implementation of a guaranteed annual livable income model in Inuit Nunangat. And within these calls for basic income, we should think about how it relates to Indigenous food sovereignty. So the development and implementation of any basic income program has to respect the autonomy of Indigenous people and specific communities and their determination of whether or not it should be delivered in their communities in the first place. And then if yes, how it would be implemented. But so in that regard, the design of a basic income on reserves in particular is an opportunity to respect Indigenous sovereignty. So if Indigenous communities decide that basic income is an appropriate policy, then the federal government should be a willing partner. But that if they decide that a basic income is not appropriate, then the federal government should not impose one. However, when led by Indigenous communities and implemented in ways that support autonomy, a basic income could be one step towards ensuring greater autonomy and food sovereignty by providing the support needed for communities to maintain sustainable livelihoods. And this can include supporting community relevant food harvesting activities. We found one study that showed that an income security program for Cree hunters and trappers in Quebec provided promising evidence that a basic income guarantee can support on-the-land activities that has positive impacts for community members and improved health and well-being in the community. So that's one example. Second bigger picture point at the intersection of food systems and basic income that we wanted to talk about was what a basic income could mean for workers in food system sectors such as agriculture and fisheries. So while during the pandemic, healthcare workers gained a lot of attention in particular for providing essential services, there were a lot of other people working in food systems, including food production workers and supermarket cashiers who were also providing essential services. And this includes, for example, people who were working in unsafe meat packing plants, who, if they had refused to work or quit their jobs, would have been potentially ineligible for CERB. And a basic income is important to think about for food system workers because it would have the potential to decrease their precarity, the precarity that they face by improving wages. It could also help improve working conditions, and it could also help to reduce their dependence on EI. And by helping these workers have secure livelihoods, we can also support sustainable food systems and food security overall. But again, as we've already spoken about and as men raised, a basic income that supports a sustainable food system would need to include migrant farm workers who are integral to our food system in Turtle Island. And this would mean ensuring that basic income is accessible to people regardless of their status, like their citizenship status, and highlights the problem we spoke again earlier about international students versus domestic students. which brings me to this point that basic income is not a silver bullet. Something that was really important to Shanae and I in preparing for this workshop and to BICYN in general as an organization is to be honest and critical when we're thinking about basic income as a meaningful solution to problems such as food security. And both the examples of Indigenous food sovereignty and food system workers highlights how basic income is not a silver bullet or the only solution that should be considered in addressing food insecurity, but also in thinking about the inadequacies of basic income in addressing food security and its multiple facets. A few other examples came to mind for us. And the first would be the ability of basic income to facilitate community and community building and how that relates to food security. And something we're thinking about is how communities like the Loaded Ladle and other food groups do a lot more than just provide food, but provide a community for people and a space to belong and connect with another and prepare food and share in that together. So that's something that basic income just on its own wouldn't be able to provide. Another thing would be access to culturally relevant food or cultural knowledge around food. It doesn't necessarily ensure access to culturally relevant food. And we can see this, especially when we think about how climate change is disproportionately impacting Northern Indigenous communities and their ecosystems and their access to culturally relevant food, or also when we think about how colonialism has impacted the ability of Indigenous youth to access cultural knowledge about food, particularly in their own languages. Another thing we wanted to highlight was adequate infrastructure. And when we think about, again, Indigenous food sovereignty in Northern or remote rural communities, we need to think about how basic income should not be used as a substitute for providing the investments necessary to improve living conditions on different reserves and to honor treaty relationships. And so part of that would be thinking about food availability and food transportation, again, especially when we're thinking about Northern communities. And then another one we were thinking about was accessibility. The general accessibility of food in most communities can also be a barrier for people, particularly for people with disabilities. And it doesn't mean a lot if you have the money to be able to purchase the food you need or want, but can't meaningfully access the spaces that you need to get that food because of things like inaccessible transportation in urban centers. So again, transportation being something that we have to think about in combination with basic income. And all of this just goes to show that basic income is not a substitute for other progressive social policies like a living wage, healthcare, education, pharmacare, accessible public transportation, affordable housing. And it also has to be combined with other community-driven strategies that are centered on things like decolonization, anti-racism, disability justice, climate justice, as just a few examples. It was really important for us to highlight this. But that being said, we really do see basic income as being an effective piece in the puzzle in reducing food insecurity.
Thank you, Ellen. So we'll open up the floor to any questions. And then what's left for the presentation is just for us to all come together and chat about what we've learned. And then kind of looking ahead for how to get involved in the movement and what you can do in your community. So does anybody have any questions that they want to share in the chat, or they can unmute themselves and ask?
Or just comments too, if you have something to add or something you've learned that you think is relevant and you'd like to share, like really, the floor is open.
Yeah, really the next part is just, we'd love to sort of talk to everybody about what they think that they could do for food security in the community, for basic income, what that would mean. So Jamie, I actually did want to comment on your comment in the chat. So Jamie had commented in the chat, I worked in an online grocery during 2020 to 2021. Most food secure I'd ever felt in one single job. And then they removed hazard pay and started policing inventory. So we couldn't take as much unsellable fresh food home. And this is something I don't know if people have heard of the Too Good To Go app. It's kind of a newer app where grocery stores and restaurants can sell their food at the end of the day or the end of the night. Yeah, Jamie, you have, where like at a really cheap price. So you kind of get these like mystery bags of like from the grocery store or like from 7-Eleven or from a restaurant or whatever of food. And you'll kind of have a general idea of like what's in the bag before you buy it, but it's just for like really cheap. Yeah, not super accessible for everywhere. Flash Food similar app, good, awesome. So it's a really good thing for people to know about. But then I was thinking how Jamie was saying, like, grocery stores might start policing their inventory as a result of that, and their actual workers could not take that stuff home at the end of the night like they might be able to. So it'd be interesting to see sort of how grocery stores and restaurants could maybe balance having their workers take that stuff home versus giving it out to the community, and just sort of how to strike that balance between not policing your workers, but also making sure food doesn't go to waste. Jamie, honestly, like this section is meant for like to open the floor. So really, if you wanted to just like speak your mind, this is the place to do it. We're all here to learn and hear about everyone's experiences. So please feel free.
I can jump in. Hi, everyone. First, just thanks for this workshop. It's been really enlightening in a kind of heart-wrenching kind of way, but like also makes me happy that there's groups trying to put together education on this. And anyways, thank you so much for this workshop. I have been in and out of the grocery industry for about 12 years now. It's kind of been my fallback job. Whenever I'm like in between jobs, I know I can get hired in grocery. And I've been all over grocery stores. Like I've worked in bakeries, I've worked in like as a cashier, I've worked in online grocery, which really blew up at the beginning of the pandemic. And I've just seen so many different aspects of why the grocery industry is terrible, especially under like big corporations. Cough, Loblaws. And then, yeah, I've seen and been told to by my boss to just throw out bags and bags of food. A lot of bread that we weren't allowed to take home because that was stealing, but it literally would go to the garbage. So like I could steal it out of the garbage once they took it outside of the store. But if I took it while I was on shift from the garbage can in the store, that was stealing, which makes no sense. And it could have gone to like so many people and so many better things. But anyways, I also have definitely taken advantage of, I'm not going to say stealing, but just turning a blind eye to like my coworkers taking home leftover food at the end of the day, or like just sneaking a couple things. Cause like when you work for a corporation, you know, like they're not losing that much money from it. And I try and put that into perspective of like, you can afford to lose 10 cents for me to take this like bag of apples or something. I don't know. But I have noticed that like as my jobs progressed wherever I was in grocery, like the policing of staff taking food and just like not necessarily taking sellable food even, but just like taking food from the garbage cans in the store, or taking food that wasn't quite presentable enough to sell. they would find ways to make that food sellable to customers, which can be good, but it also could have fed someone at home. And I work because grocery workers tend to be a lot of like low income jobs. Those people need food too. And the fact that every grocery store I've worked at, I can't afford to buy my own groceries from that store. I've never had a discount. I've never really had any perks that involved food security from any of my grocery jobs. And I could rant about this forever, so please stop me if we need to move on. But yeah, thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Thank you. No, thank you for sharing. And I just popped in the chat that, yeah, like these conversations around food waste, how grocery stores are run, how workers who are part of the food industry are underpaid. Like these are all the conversations that are part of the bigger picture stuff, and is why Ellen and I wanted to include these bigger conversations in this, because food security goes just as high up as it goes to the individual level.
And I found even, sorry, just another mini rant. The last grocery company I worked for, I specifically chose because their whole thing was like they're sustainable. They are really against food waste. They're trying to promote urban farming. And then once the pandemic hit and they started making a ton of money off of online groceries, they started to buy out all of their competition in Toronto and monopolize the organic grocery store industry. So their main competitors are basically Farm Boy and Whole Foods because they've bought everybody, and they just like capitalism and greed like went to their heads, and they really sacrificed a lot of those like reasons that I wanted to work there, of like sustainability and like just better business practices. And I lost a lot of respect for them. And yeah, that's another story I could rant on forever, but
Absolutely.
I'll give the floor back to y'all.
That's super interesting. The monopolizing of grocery stores and food, and seeing food as capital when really it's a basic need. Min, you popped in the chat about the silver bullet thing. So it should be combined with other work in the community. And we wanted to pop that in too, because we are doing this presentation in partnership with the Loaded Ladle. And Loaded Ladle does so much more than just, provide food. It's also a community, which adds so much in and of itself. So Sue, I see your hand, but before I go to you, I wanted to see Min if you wanted to add anything else to the comment that you had added in the chat.
Thank you. Yeah, I just really appreciate that, because I feel like a lot of situations, people might be just grab their attention is kind of focused on like one or two things I see often either in the news or in the media, and people pay a lot of attention to it. But I feel like sometimes there's lack of advocacy for a lot more basic work need to be done in the community to make things more, sustainable, and and to think about like when those work has been done, what has what's the legacy for the community, and did you cause more harm? And for example, the pilot happened in Ontario when they just took it away, and have like anybody thought about the consequences when that happened? And I just really appreciate how comprehensive you had those thinking and put those information together. And I really feel like that kind of advocacy work and that effort to hold government accountable is really from the community, from people, and from like a combined voice. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Min. Sue, go ahead.
Yeah, just to answer the question that's on the board of what are the opportunities to advocate for basic income and food security. Something that has come up from another collective like ours in Newfoundland is that when people approach the coordinator of a food service program of like how the government can help the program, he just says we need more basic income, but for some reason people are more willing to address issues if they're food related rather than just like the government giving basic income. And I see food collectives as a good space to like start that conversation and politicize people towards that more, especially a lot of the people who come to grab meals at the ladle don't want to consider themselves as political for whatever reason, but sort of through the ladle learn more about food issues. This is how I got involved as well. I just started eating free, like I just started going there just for the free food. Then I got more well versed in food advocacy. So I think like in the future of like creating those conversations, making connections more to like food and housing and like how these are more sustainable solutions, I think could be a good way to like start more those connections, as all of these are intersectional. So it would be nice to like go to other food collectives and have a conversation about basic income as well.
Yeah, I'm so excited that you said that, because I'm going to go to the next slide. Because basically that's kind of exactly what we were thinking, is that, like you said, like food security is a really compelling reason and a really concrete way for people to sort of visualize why a solution like basic income might be necessary, and like people might have a hard time seeing what a basic income can do for everybody. So it just sort of gives this very like compelling reason to advocate for a basic income. Some other things we were talking about is just sort of leveraging university authority and other community institutions to support and advocate for a basic income for students and young people and just the population in general. And yeah, with the rising cost of food and just overall rising cost of living, now really is the perfect time to kind of leverage that support and get involved, because people of all walks of life are feeling it. Like I live in a dual income household. We do not have any kids. And I just had a conversation last week with my boyfriend around what we can do to like scale back on our grocery bill costs. And it's just like, you do not really imagine that as somebody who, you know, has two incomes. Like it just doesn't make sense. So people from all walks of life are feeling this. And so I think it's really a good time to sort of start making these calls to action. I'll wrap us up here and then we can have some time at the end to discuss too, if people want to hang around. So looking ahead, how we can get involved in the basic income movement. You can be aware of some of the basic income developments across the country. So right now we're exploring implementation. I say we, like I'm involved. I'm personally not involved. Exploring implementation in Prince Edward Island. You can get involved with local groups. So for those of you joining us from Dalhousie, there's the Basic Income Nova Scotia Society. I also just saw on the Loaded Ladle's Instagram that the Nova Scotia Justice for Workers monthly meeting is happening on February 9th, which is timely given the raise of the minimum wage in Nova Scotia to $15, but Halifax's cost of living is $23 an hour. So this organization wants to fight for a raise to $20 an hour. And I think, again, this is an issue felt across the board. That minimum wage does not necessarily match living wage. And again, that's what we call for when we're talking about the difference between a basic income guarantee and a guaranteed livable income. And then there's some upcoming conferences. So for example, there's the Basic Income Guarantee Conference, June 8th to 9th. That's being held in Chicago, Illinois, but I believe also is accessible virtually. And then you can volunteer with us. So we're wrapping up our planning for 2023. We're wanting to do more presentations and workshops just like this one. We're also working on some, they're called cases for basic income with Coalition Canada Basic Income, and a lot of other fun activities planned for the year. And we're always happy to connect and expand our voice across Canada. And lastly, sign up for our newsletter. That's how you can keep in touch with all of the things going on in basic income land and going on in our organization. So I'll just pop the link in the chat here in a second. I just want to say thank you to everybody. I'll let Ellen have her thank you moment as well. Like, we were both so grateful for everybody coming and participating, and this was a lot of fun. We really enjoyed it. We're both super passionate about it, so it's awesome.
Yeah, I just personally wanted to say thank you too. Like, to be completely honest, this was Shanae and I's first time doing a presentation with BICYN. So we're a little bit nervous, and it was just really awesome to have people who were so engaged and like interested and had things to share. I feel like I learned a lot too from, you know, just you folks who attended, and that was really awesome for me. Just thinking about that, like food insecurity and basic income moving forward. But if anybody has any like last questions or just things they want to share, feel free to jump in. We're happy to just answer questions. Otherwise, you are not like required to stay. Like, we don't want to take up more time than you need. So if you want to like go do your thing, please feel free.
I am just popping a little feedback form in the chat. Like I said, we're looking to do a lot more presentations and workshops like this in the next year and beyond. So it would be really great to hear from everybody if you have the time and ability to do so. Just what you liked about the presentation, what you didn't like. And the feedback is totally anonymous, so don't worry. And yeah, we would love to hear from you. But yeah, please stick around if you have any more questions, or you can reach us over email or over Instagram, but keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nan.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Shania and Ellen, one of the earlier slides had a point about how basic income can like increase trust within community. I can't remember the language that you guys had used on that side specifically, but what's interested to me in a conversation we didn't have in this webinar, and I know that's like because it's not the purpose of the webinar, is just around how the cancellation of the Minnesota pilot or project, not cancellation of it, but you know, the dropped ball that was the Minnesota project, and then now the cancellation of the Ontario basic income pilot did so much damage in terms of trust, both with government and then within